This is Paul Nobles from ETPerform.com. I am here with April Blackford. April and I are headed to New York City because apparently if you make it there, you can make it anywhere. And we're going to try and make it there to do a seminar at CrossFit NYC. So we're pretty excited about that. April, you want to say hi to everybody?
Hi, everybody.
So people are being shy and waiting to give us hit us with questions. So in the meantime, I'm going to talk to April a little bit about Fitbit. As many of you guys know, I'm currently doing a Fitbit challenge. April is potentially going to do a Fitbit challenge for herself. We actually have a number of members that are doing what I'm doing, which is kind of interesting. I know that Leonie has been doing it pretty recently from England. And so that's kind of cool. I think what ultimately I'm trying to show people is that what ETPerform is the number on your wrist, right? It's your total daily energy expenditure. And so if I put, eat the amount that's on my wrist, that's pretty close to what my expenditure is. And there is an interesting exception to that. And April is the interesting exception to that. Chantel is the interesting exception to that. Catherine Adams is the interesting exception to that. And we'll talk a little bit about those guys and why their Fitbit numbers are so low, and why they actually can eat more than other people can. Let's see. So Tanya's saying, not being shy, but I'm looking forward to hearing about the Fitbit challenge. I think mine would starve me.
Yes, I know the feeling.
So basically, when you lift weights and you're not like, super cardio intensive type of workouts, your muscle is kind of like fast twitch, dense muscle. Right? And so what a lot of people in that situation see is they see 2,100 calories on their Fitbit and they're like, what the heck? I'm eating 2,300 and I'm not gaining any weight. So it's like no big deal. Well, Fitbit doesn't know what your muscle fiber's like. Fitbit doesn't know that you lift weights. Fitbit doesn't know that you have a lot of lean mass. And so this actually plays out in mine too, right? If I eat relatively low fat and a lot of carbohydrate, because I've had my carbohydrates up close to 500, and as long as I keep my fats under 100, I mean, like my weight goes down, and usually my calorie intake can be fairly high. So if my burn is 3,100. My calorie intake, I've had my calorie intake up to like 3,700 without any change in weight. It does depend on the other factor that happened for me is rowing one day. I ended up after my rowing session. Now, if you do a lot of long endurance, you would not experience this, right? Because your body would have adjusted to it by now. But I rode a 10K row last Wednesday and went out and had burger and fries and then a root beer, and of course posted it online because it didn't happen unless you do that. But quickly the very next day, I was just eating normal, had my oatmeal, had my chicken and rice and a salad, and quickly started to feel like a drag on my body. So one thing that I do is, it's sort of interesting. I talked about this in Slot just now. Slot, by the way, is Science Lab off topic. I don't know if everybody knows that or not, but so what I talked about was that I weigh myself sometimes 2-3 times a day, when I'm not feeling off or I kind of want to. I usually do weigh myself the night before just to kind of see what the weight fluctuation is. I'd say I probably do that 3 times a week. And then, of course, I weigh myself every single morning, and then I log that into the Fitbit. Which kind of reminds me, I don't think I did it. I don't think I did it this week. I don't think I did it today. Does that make sense, April? I mean, like that does explain a little bit why. I'll tell you, early on, I was trying to get a whole bunch of steps in, and it just like the wear and tear on my feet and all this other type of stuff just got to be like extreme. But more importantly, as I started adding in food and started eating a lot more food, because I mean, I was like, well, hey, let's really test this. Let's get to 3,500 and then let's see how much food I can eat. And all that food, after a while, became somewhat exhausting, and so I sort of settled in at kind of a reasonable level. Certainly on days that I work out, my intake is high. Most days I'm at like 2,700, 2,800. But I think what's most interesting to people is my rest days, especially my rest day carbohydrates. My rest day carbohydrates now are like 300. So I think that what people aren't completely realizing is that you don't get there with kale and chicken, like I say all the time. I mean, you have to add in some energy density. And so the whole idea of Eat to Perform, kind of getting to that main point, is that you're taking 4 months, let's say 4 months period where you're not dieting, because I just got through cutting. I think I ended on June 6th, right? So basically, between June 6th and September 1st, which is the time that I may do another cut, I will pack in as many calories as I can and as much work as I can without really gaining a lot of weight. I allow for some fluctuation. My lowest was 166.8. And basically, I've been able to stay under 170. On the weekend, it'll tick up to 170.4, maybe 171. And then during the week, it kind of comes down to 169. It's going to be interesting in New York. I'll be there for a week. Obviously, we're going to be eating a lot of New York food. So it's going to be interesting to kind of track that. But, most of, the vacation weight and stuff like that, it's going to be interesting. It'll be interesting to see. I don't think it's going to be a big deal one way or the other, even if my weight does end up being up, I'll just come back and, kind of have mostly whole foods and do the things you do to regulate your weight. I mean, there's no real secrets there.
Exactly.
And
The one thing that I did notice with the Fitbit that I thought was very cool was my sleep. Every night, every single night, like it would literally show 11 to 12 minutes of restlessness, so getting comfortable to go to sleep, and then it was just flat. 7.5 hours. Just completely flat, like no movement whatsoever. Thank you, Perform, and all the carbs. So, I
mean, I'll tell you, coming out of the wave, and then, eating, relatively normal, but up in those carbohydrates from basically what was like 250 to 300 on a big day, but a lot of days there was like, 200. Now having 450 to 300. I mean, when I first started doing that, it was like going to sleep after getting hit by a tranquilizer dart. I mean, I was like drool on the pillow, sleepy. Yeah, it was pretty nuts. And I've been sleeping really well. I sleep. A lot of times, I'll sleep 6.5 to 7 hours. Occasionally, I'll sleep 8 hours, but I feel rested. Lately, I've napped a few times, which is, I wish I could nap more. I feel like I could live to be 150 if I napped more. So does that help you? Because I know that a lot of people get really weirded out. I mean, you mentioned and I remember Chantel talking about this a little bit, that it just like messes with her head, that she's
Well,
that she's
I
over,
think
and she's clearly not.
exactly, and she's kind of in the same boat where we neither one of us. I don't do any formal cardio, and it's literally been like 100 degrees here. I walked with my husband and took our dog for a walk one day last week, and like it's so hot, you know, you got your legs are chafing. It's hot. It's just hot, you know. It's unbearable. You know, so I don't have as much time to go out and take walks and do things like that because of the heat, but I don't do any formal cardio. The first day it was really high, like almost 2,600. And then after that, the burns were so low, you know, and I know it tracks your steps, but it also should track your heart rate, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so the heart rate, so I did like super heavy deadlifts, like 260 for deadlifts, heart's racing, you know, for working sets. And I think that day I still burned only like 1,800 calories, you know, and
It doesn't do well. You'll also notice, like if you check it, that sometimes the heart rate will go out, you know, like if you sweat or something like that. That's why I say to people, like, don't focus on the exercise part. It's just not that helpful.
I did tell my husband we did have sex and I only burned 4 calories during that. But I did tell him that at this point we were just going to just strictly use it as an experiment for sex and just try to get the burns up as high as possible.
We've had way too much sex talk, I think, recently. So let's get to the questions. So Nadia says, in terms of low intensity workout, what is a heart rate range at which you should stay before it becomes a workout session that would be considered training day worthy? I usually consider 125 to 140 a good range. I mean, certainly anything lower than that, you'd be fine. 140, I think you're really starting to get into kind of like the you know, workout range. But once again, that's the other advantage of having a tracker. You know, one of the things that people say, well, is this a control day or is this not a control day? Well, you kind of know, right? I mean, you at least have an idea. Have you seen a difference in terms of your workout days compared to your rest days, April?
What do you mean?
Well, like on your workout days, or the calories up 300, 400?
In the first high day, they were all averaging the same, around the same. It was, you know, like 18 to, I think I had one day that was like 17 to 18. I think I saw one day it was 1,900.
But it doesn't sound like you're consciously trying to get in more steps because you have it.
No.
Yeah.
Well, I did take the dog for a walk.
If you think about it, it sort of makes sense. Like you work out, right? Because you work out in the morning, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you work out, you're tired, right? Normally you would have more energy and you might walk around the house a little bit more, but because you're tired, you're not going to necessarily burn as many calories. Do you think that that's possible?
I don't know. I did notice one thing was one morning, whenever I had the really, really deep sleep, whenever I first got up, I clicked it and looked, and it was at 0 calories. So obviously it reset and whenever I woke up. Well, then the next day I had very, very deep sleep, and whenever I clicked it, it had already registered that I burned 300. And this was at like 5 something in the morning. You know, so I don't.
Well, the second scenario sounds more correct because it resets at midnight, I believe.
Yes, exactly. So I don't know. You know, I was, you know, I am somewhat busy. Obviously, you know, my house is on the market to sell, so I have to clean it frequently, you know, and that's actually pretty. There was a couple of times cleaning the house that I would look and my heart rate was up higher, you know, because you're rushing, you're vacuuming, you're climbing stairs, you know, things like that, you know. So I don't know. It is very interesting, but
yeah, I think the other thing too is April and I have been very busy with groups the last 2 weeks, and so, you know, when we would be able to normally get out, we haven't been able to get out, so that's also playing a little bit of role in both of our lives. So I hope that answers your question, Nadia. But yeah, I would say 125 to 145 is what I'd be looking at. It sort of depends on your age. But, when you start breathing hard, you're starting to sweat, things of that nature, you're working out, you know. But also, if you have an activity tracker, make sure to account for that. Because what I see happening, what we're seeing happen a lot, pretty much everybody that's in groups, they do have an activity tracker. I would say probably 90% do. And I think the thing that sort of surprises people, especially for the people that, are just getting them, is the amount of steps that they're taking. They're sort of the opposite of April. Their workouts and stuff like this are more cardio based. They're more running, and so they're building these huge deficits, but they're not necessarily keeping up from a calorie standpoint. That's actually the biggest argument for the way that you're doing it, April. The way that you're doing it, is a great way to build and keep muscle, especially if your weight isn't down. And so, the goal of this whole experiment for me is after 30 days, to write an article saying, hey, your Fitbit, hey, Fitbit folks, you're doing it wrong, because everybody's trying to build these huge deficits. And I'm like, the secret's really not in the deficits. The secret is in building up the work capacity and eating, an appropriate amount of food for what you do. So let's see. Rhonda's saying, is this an open forum for questions? I'm brand spanking new and have a bunch of docs and invitation to webinars, but don't really know how to get started. Yeah, the whole idea is that you would ask questions and then we would kind of answer them as you go. If you're new, the one thing that I would say to you is, use the forum and the coaching in the forums as your main resource, and then kind of use the books as sort of a manual. But if you have basic questions, absolutely, go ahead and do that. Let's see. Tanya's saying my 5-week average intake is 2510 and my 5-week average burn is 1954. Weight fluctuate the same 3 pounds. Fitbit hates petite muscular women. Yeah, I think that that's true. I think that when muscle building is a priority for you, or you're mostly weight training, which is really interesting to know. I think that you could also say it a different way, Tanya. You could say that Fitbit doesn't really like weight trainers, and that's certainly Chantel's experience. But I think that I don't know. It'd be interesting to compare it. We do have a lot of athletes that are, females that are 5'10" and 6 feet tall. It would be interesting, but honestly, especially a lot of the people in the groups, they're really cardio focused and not as much, weight training focused. And so I think that if you're weight training focused, your burn is pretty high. But most of my days, honestly, like right now, I'm sitting here below the desk and my knees are, wobbling. I'm just naturally an antsy person. And so I get 20,000 steps every single day, maybe not every single day, but pretty close to it. I'm pretty, a lot of times, you see it in staff meetings where I'll be like walking around the house,
I call that the Blair Witch Project walk.
Yeah. Or the other is like, it's like a Spike Lee movie.
I just want to tell Tanya, or is it Tanya or Tanya?
I don't know if it's Tanya or Tanya. Well, it depends on where she lives in the country, right?
I just want to tell you, just keep eating, because I'm eating over 600 calories over my average burns, and don't let it get to you mentally. Just keep eating.
Okay, she's saying Tanya, not Tanya, so she's not from Florida. She's not from Alabama. So let's see. And for those people that think I'm making fun of the South, I'm from Louisiana, so I would not make fun of the South. Um, Definitely don't want to piss the rednecks off. Okay, so Chris is saying, so I'm guessing that since I'm in the middle of marathon training, I'll be able to eat more than my 3,100 calorie goal on long run days. Absolutely. I have some training runs that'll be 20 miles, which would be about 3,000 calories burned. What's the proper way to adjust for this? Well, the proper way to adjust to it would be to have some level of of energy tracker that gives you some idea on what you're burning. But one of the things that we suggest is that as you're running, you might want to have some carbohydrates and some food, kind of whatever is most comfortable for you. Now, one of the things that's interesting, because we talk a lot about Vitargo, and this is actually a recommendation that I've been making more based on Alex Vieda's hybrid training book, and is something that I think that will become kind of a standard recommendation for long endurance folks. But what he recommends is for every 24 ounces that you have 15 for every 24 ounces you have 15 grams of carbohydrate. Now, if you look at the standard recommendation on the bottle of Vitargo, it's like a multiple of that. It's probably 5 times that. But the problem is that when you're running, your body's not going to absorb it near as well. It really needs more water than it needs more carbohydrate at that point, just to stay hydrated. And so something like 15 grams of carbohydrates, through like Vitargo or Waxy Maize or whatever you use, and then a Nun tab will kind of set you up. I also think that, having like a bar available or something for longer runs also makes sense. But, can you give me some idea, Chris, how long 20 miles would take you? Because for each hour, you can burn anywhere from 500 to 1,000 calories, right? And so you could potentially, like he's saying, burn 3,000 calories. And that's not, he's saying I run with GU and Gatorade about 3 to 3.5 hours. So yeah, 3,000 is totally realistic there, which means that you can't do chicken and kale post-workout, right? It's burgers and fries time with, a shake. You need that post-meal to be something in the neighborhood of 2,000 to 2,500 calories. And if you eat from 2 energy-dense sources, you won't get there. And you go, well, why is that important? Why is it important for me to recover or to recover the energy that I lost? And once again, it involves the word recover. For you to be able to adapt to the stimulus that you were trying to put on your body, you've got to provide an appropriate amount of energy so you get better and your runs go better next time. And so what you'll see when you actually eat to your level of activity is that you'll be leaner. One of the people that I talked to today is training for Ironman, and she does similar type stuff. She was talking about a 5-hour run. And I told her, I was like, honestly, because she is a vegetarian, I was like, you need to have like a burrito, and then you need to have like a pint of Ben & Jerry's. And I said, and when you go to bed, you're going to feel bloated and yucky. And when you wake up, you're going to look ripped. So that's the value of having full muscles. And so, it's going to feel like a lot of food, but you're going to have to trust me on this one. It's going to end up being a net plus. The one thing I would say is keep an eye on the scale, but trust me, it's not going to be as bad as you think. And you're going to look in the mirror and you're going to go, this is exactly what I've been going for. Do you have any thoughts on that? Obviously,
Yeah, I see a lot of people who do not properly eat enough to properly recover, and the scale will actually increase. It will increase,
Yes.
just from stress overall. If you don't eat enough to recover from something like that, the scale will actually go up, and it will take you, 3, 4 days, sometimes 5 days to get it back to stabilize. The only thing I would add in, I definitely agree about the intra run with the mix of solid foods, gels, liquids. But also, I would have a very carb dense dinner the night before.
Okay, so now here's Alex's recommendation, and this is interesting as well. He's saying have a carb dense meal the night before, but a light one. And you would have the majority of your carbs in lunch. And his thinking is that it allows for better absorption, a bigger average. Um, you're not uncomfortable going to bed, and you're not still processing food when you wake up, right? And so your weight would probably be up in that scenario, but you would have more available energy for your run. So I think that um, that's something, I don't do a lot of long endurance, but I am going to try and do some long endurance using his recommendation to see how it feels. But I do think it's interesting. He's not saying you wouldn't have carbohydrates. What he's saying is you would have light carbohydrates in the evening and your bigger meal at lunch the day before. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. And I
Yeah.
guess it depends upon, the time that you're running. Most people would run early in the morning, which would explain, you
Yeah, I
know,
mean, we're talking about, like Chris is saying, 20-mile runs and stuff like
yeah,
this. So, this is not something that you would do if, you're doing Murph. We're not talking about
yeah.
Murph. Yeah, Murph is hard, but we're talking about something more extreme than that. So slow carbs, I'm assuming. Yeah, I think that slow carbs make some sense. The slow carb, fast carb thing, I'm not super invested in that. I think one of the things that we talked about recently in one of the workouts or webinars was the idea of not just having slow carbs, but using fats to slow the absorption. So the best example would be if you had Chipotle and then you added guacamole to slow the absorption. So don't just think, slow carbs. Think you could also use fats to slow the absorption. So I hope that helps. So Sophie's saying, speaking of sleep, I know it's crucial for recovery, but does everyone has to get 8 hours in or more just to wake up naturally? I usually function fairly well on about 6 hours of sleep, but I don't usually get to sleep through 8 hours. I actually just mentioned that I only sleep about 6.5 hours, and I'm typically fine. I do, nap when I can, and that seems to come kind of naturally. Actually, today I ended up napping. Um, just I don't know. This is actually interesting. Um, there is a new movie theater. Well, it's actually an older movie theater, but they made a change, and they have recliners in all of the movie theaters now, or in all of the theaters. And I mean, I cannot stay awake in that thing. I mean, it is unreal, But you'll never go to another movie after experiencing that. I mean, it's really super comfortable, and it really makes me want to get that for my house.
I
um,
think I think in general, in regard to Sophie's question, I think everyone is different. Some people
yeah,
function great with 6 hours. Some people function better with. I'm personally more of a 7, 8 would be great. Some days I can get 9. Um, but some people actually have the opposite, where if they sleep 8 or 9 hours, they actually wake up and feel like they have a hangover. Too much sleep gives the opposite effect, where they don't feel good with too much sleep. So I would say everyone, it's totally personal dependent. But if you wake up on your own and you feel great, then obviously that's an adequate amount of sleep.
well, I think that if you're getting 5 to 6 hours sleep, and then on the weekends you get 8 to 9 hours sleep, that's kind of a bad sign, right? Like,
Hmm.
you want your sleep to be somewhat consistent. and we were having this discussion, and people talk about sleep like they want sleep, but they don't really want sleep, right? And I know it gets tough, and I'll fully admit to you, I'm not like perfect with it, because I want to be able to enjoy my life, and part of that enjoyment is watching Jon Stewart at night sometimes, and so that stops my sleep. But when I start to run into problems, sleep becomes a bigger priority for me. And I mean, if you know that you need to wake up at 6:30 and you want to sleep 7 to 7.5 hours, then just do the math. You've got to start winding down around 10 to be able to get to sleep at 11. And but if you're always pushing it to midnight, getting 6.5 hours sleep, and then oversleeping on the weekends at 9, and then you're always playing this game of catch up, I would argue that you're really not making sleep a priority. And like I said this weekend, I mean, more food, more sleep, more sex. That's the secret to life. I mean, that should literally be the Eat to Perform logo at this point. So and then Sophie said, also for lists for rest days, if you have a fairly active job and log these active minutes on the Fitbit, does it still count as a rest day? Once again, we're getting caught up on the rest day because we're guessing. Like I said, there is a device that allows you to not guess. There are devices that allow you to not guess. I mean, you can use your phone. I would say if you have an active job, then viewing it as a low-calorie control day might hurt you. Actually, April talked about it just now. She talked about when you build these big, huge deficits, and this is what happens with the cardio folks. When you build these huge deficits, a lot of times your weight will go up as a result, and then it takes a while for your body to recover. Well, what does it take? It takes some carbohydrates and it takes some rest. So you'd have been better off just having the damn carbohydrates in the first place, and the extra food. And so I think people are getting caught up in, no matter how many times I say it, no matter how many times we qualify it, people really want to believe that the secret is in a deficit. And they're secretly still dieting, and I get it. People are coming from an underfed background, and maybe they were eating 1,400 calories and now they're eating 1,900 calories, so they feel like they're eating a lot of food. But if their body really wants to be 2,400, that's where we need to be, right? The whole idea of Eat to Perform is that you're stuffing as much food as you possibly can in smaller, in like longer windows of 3 to 4 months, maybe 4 to 6 months, maybe a year, right? And then you take short bursts of time of 8 to 10 weeks where you're really focused on fat loss. Now, if you're scared shitless to add food, then you're probably going to be cautious. But that's not our problem. That's you. I mean, your body secretly would adapt to it. You're just not mentally there yet. And that's fine that that's the case for you. But I'm saying to you is that you're really missing the gold at the end of the rainbow if you're keeping the reins held tight. You feel me, April?
I absolutely feel you. Absolutely.
So, yeah. Anyway, so Nadia had, let's see, another question. I'm 2 weeks in ETP with Total Daily Energy. The moderator gave me when I reevaluate those numbers, should I do when I start getting hungrier? Definitely. That would be the time that I would look at for reevaluating. So if you shouldn't be looking at your calories burned in your Fitbit, then what should you use the Fitbit for, since it doesn't accurately tell you how much you're burning while training anyway? Well, what I'm saying is that I actually do use the exact number on my Fitbit. But I'm saying is that if you just weight train and it's giving you a low number and you're not, like Catherine Adams as an example, she was telling me, hey, this is showing me 1,900 calories. I was like, I don't care what it's showing you. Eat 2,300 calories. If the scale's not moving, you're certainly not gaining fat. You know, I mean, if you're weight training, right, and you're eating 2,300 calories and you're staying weight stable, you're adding lean mass. That's just plain and simple. That's physiology 101, you know. And so I think it's just the fear, you know, and trying to make sense of things that don't make sense. But there is a part of data that you have to sort of push. You know, I mean, you know, I talk a little bit about my poker background, okay? But the secret to poker is not understanding data. It's not understanding pot odds. It's not understanding, you know, things of that nature. It's understanding when to push things outside of the data that's represented, right? And so, you know, that's a little bit of what I learned from poker that I'm bringing to this nutrition thing, is that sometimes you have to bluff. Sometimes you have to eat a little bit more because you know you're hungry, and even though, you know, your calories aren't lining up, you know, there's something missing. And that something missing is that draw on your body that ultimately you're going to need to address. And, you know, Fitbit's not going to be perfect. Nothing's going to be perfect. I can't even imagine that they can catch up to it for a while. The human body's kind of a tricky deal, you know. All we're really trying to do is get you guys in the right ballpark. But it's interesting to me that people go, well, you know, the Fitbit, it's not accurate, so therefore I'm not interested in it. Well, you know what's really not accurate? Not doing anything, not having any understanding at all. I'd rather be off 200 calories than being off 700 calories or 1,200 calories, because that's what we see on a daily basis, you know? And so all we're trying to do is get you into the right ballpark. And then once we have you in the right ballpark, we can make tweaks from there. So
I actually want to touch on what you were talking about, you know, in regards to pushing it. You know, when you get hungrier, obviously that is an indicator that your body is saying, I need more food, you know, I want more energy, you know, so you can increase then. But also, you know, I did this personally. You can't be afraid to try to expand. You can't be afraid to push the limits a little bit. You know, granted, no, I didn't increase my overall calories by 50 every single week, you know, but every 6 weeks or so, even if I wasn't hungry, I still pushed the limits. You know, I still added another 150 calories and hung out for a bit, you know, because it's all about, you know, trying to work the expansion, trying to get your work capacity up, because the more muscle mass you add, you know, it's going to play into your favor. You know, your basal metabolic rate is going to increase. Everything is going to be better for you, you know, in the long run. And you can't, like what you said, you can't be afraid, you know.
Yeah, sleep's going to be better. Libido's going to be better. You know, all these different things. So all of these things end up being a plus. And so, you know, when you go, well, how do I function best as a human being? It's going to be, you know, providing your body the amount of food that it needs. We you know, are starting to get the final versions of the Wave Method book, and it's going to be interesting because I think people are going to read it and they're going to just hear what they want to hear. But 2/3 of the book is about expansion, right? But people are going to focus on the 1/3 that they want. The 1/3 has been covered. You know, it's been covered by Weight Watchers and The Zone and all this other stuff. No one has covered expansion. This was literally the first book I've ever read on the topic of expansion, especially as it relates to a broader market. Certainly in terms of bulking, you know, people talk about bulking for 23-year-old dudes all the time. But what they don't talk about is eating adequate amounts of food for 46-year-old females. And we're really the first people to address that in the marketplace. And obviously, you know, we've seen so many people have great results as a result of that. And so it's going to be interesting to see how the market responds to that book and that information. Frankly, you know, I'm not optimistic. You know, I just think that people want to hear what they think is true, you know, and secretly they want to pay a price. They want to feel bad for, you know, maybe some decisions that they made. You know, they haven't consciously worked towards being fit, you know, or healthy for a while. And that's both ways, undereating and overeating. And so what we're going to say is the truth, you know, and what we're presenting are facts, you know, But facts aren't always interesting. What people are really interesting is they're really into raspberry ketones and detoxes and all this other type of stuff that actually detracts from what the real goal is, and the real goal is thriving. And people are like, well, I plan to thrive eventually. How? Explain to me how that happens. Explain to me how you go on a diet. I mean, we hear diets, just horror stories from people that were eating 500 calories. Like, and the idea that you could eat that low and then come back and then be normal eventually. I mean, just show me the one example, and then I would say, okay, there's your one. I haven't seen one example. Certainly everyone always focuses on the before and afters of those types of scenarios. Show me that 6 week after that after. That's what I want to see, right? Because I can show you eat before people 6 week after their 6 week after, and they still look ripped. That's the value of food. So Renee is saying, I have a question about calorie intake. I lift 4 days a week, 1 day of bodyweight exercise circuit for cardio. Would like to start incorporating more bike rides. My husband and I both ride, and I like to include at least 30-mile bike rides per week. My current total daily energy expenditure is 2257, 150. How can I adjust my diet to safely include this type of cardio? Well, I think that having a better understanding of your total daily energy expenditure, I mean, when you incorporate a 30-mile bike ride, even if you just use your phone, I mean, you could literally Google it and you would know that is going to add a lot of calories. And so you're really going to want to add that. Now, when you're first coming from an underfed background, you're going to want to add it slowly. But this is a good question for the forums. I would think that you would get a much better answer, more inclusive answer. But the simple answer is you're going to have to add more food. She did ask a follow-up as well. I just started ETP, and my goal is body recomp, and I have a good deal of fat to lose. I'm 5'2", 174 pounds with Fitbit scale reading of body fat percentage 35%. The thing is, Renee, is I probably agree with you that you may have some fat to use, but often in situations like yours, body type matters. If you have hips, if you have a chest, oftentimes that's going to be body fat, and sometimes that's just genetic, right? But what you can control is the amount of muscle that you have on your body. And if you're under eating, you're really not going to have a great formula. And one of the discussions that I always have with people is, what's the formula from getting 35 to 30? It might be, going down in weight, but it also might be adding muscle mass along the way. And so when you look at it, the cycles that we're talking about really make a lot of sense in your instance. It sounds like, well, I don't know if you're under eating or overeating, so I would be interested to hear your thoughts on that. Because you just mentioned your total daily energy expenditure. What I'd like to know is, were you eating more than that or less than that previous to this? Because if you're eating less than that, well then, we need to have a period of expansion so we can get your calories up. You won't necessarily gain weight in that scenario because your body's been dying to be, your body's been dying to get appropriately fed. But once we have a couple months under your belt, then of course we can start working on fat loss. But you're getting fat loss both ways, right? So when you have your period of expansion, let's say that's 3 months, and you can stay weight stable at 174. I talked a little bit about this earlier with Catherine Adams' situation. If you're staying weight stable and you're doing more and you're eating more, you're building muscle. That's just plain and simple, especially if you're lifting weights. I mean, that's probably the big factor there. Certainly, you could add a lot of cardio. That's not going to give you the appropriate muscle response, but at least you won't lose, muscle that's on your frame at that point. But we're obviously big fans of resistance training in that respect. So I hope that helps. I don't know if she's still here or not. She asked the question a few minutes ago, but I'd be interested to know if she's coming from an overfed background or an underfed background, or if she even knows. A lot of people, once they start tracking, they didn't necessarily know if they were undereating or overeating. So Jill was asking, I have low blood sugar issues. I go to bed right after dinner. I work out early and I wake up hungry. I wonder, let's see, what to eat at that time. I'll eat protein when I get home. Let's see, is she talking about home from the workout, or is she talking about home from, I think she's talking about home from the workout, right?
Yeah.
Um,
I would say if it's early in the morning, she just needs something to stabilize her blood sugars. Maybe like a banana or half a banana or something would be.
Well, I think if you're waking up hungry, right, you're under eating.
Oh, what? No, not always. Not always. Because I wake up a lot of days hungry, and like I can eat a lot and then wake up the next day starving.
If I wake up hungry, I eat.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I guess it's just.
Am I missing something there?
No, absolutely. I guess it's just depending upon what kind of training she's doing and how early she's training. Because some people, if you're going to CrossFit, which I have to bow down to the people that can do the 5 a.m. class, because crap, I can't even imagine functioning. I have to drink at least 3 cups of coffee before I can function, but I can't imagine, 5 a.m., actually getting up and having like a pre-workout meal or, kind of like a substantial meal that early.
Yeah.
And not puking. So I guess it's just depending upon the type of training and what she's doing.
She did get her Fitbit today, so that'll give us a little bit more information. I know that she's in the coaching groups as well, so we'll be able to help her with that. But I think blood sugar issues are ultimately energy issues, and trying to find what works. I do kind of agree with you, actually. I still think that if you're averaging an adequate amount of food, you won't wake up near as hungry. But that obviously can change based on what you ate the night before or something like that. So, those are factors. The one thing I would say in terms of blood sugar is that if you just ate protein post-workout, that is insulinogenic. And so you may have some value to have some carbohydrates with that, and that may stabilize your blood sugar as well. So I would keep that in mind. But I think overall, if we can kind of get the overall calorie intake kind of similar to what your calorie burn is for the day, saying I do like eggs and grits. I think eggs and grits would be a great choice.
That is my go-to pre-workout meal every day.
I saw April's secret stash of grits this morning in one of the staff meetings.
Wow, you saw that? You're very observant.
Like a big gigantic thing. I don't even think they sell big gigantic things of grits like that up here in the north. She said, also during the day, if I get tired, maybe missed a snack, all resolve leaves. As in today, I was in a meeting. When I left, I was so weak and hungry, I had a Coke. Yeah, I think this is starting to sound like preparation issues, right, April? I mean, I can tell you guys, one of the things I talked about last week, it's been coming up a lot in assessments, is the idea of creating a portrait, right? And how you create that portrait. You have the base layer, and the base layer for April, the base layer for myself, the base layer for a lot of our coaches is making sure that we're getting it in an adequate amount of food earlier in the day so we're not playing catch up later in the day. And if you're working out early in the morning, okay, like April was talking about, so your calories reset at midnight, right, on your Fitbit, right? A lot of times, you know, I'll get to noon and I might not get to 800-900 calories, and then by the time I work out at 6, you know, I'm at 2200. You know, so it sort of depends on your level of activity. But if you're, you know, waking up and working out, right? So your workouts at 5 o'clock in the morning, you might be burning through 1,000 calories, and you know you have to just look, did I eat 1,000 calories? And so if you haven't eaten 1,000 calories, that might be like a ding 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 moment, you know. um, and so I would kind of keep that in mind. It doesn't need to be perfect, but you have to have some level of preparation, because what I'm seeing a lot is, you know, and you see this a lot in slot, science lab off topic, where people go, well, you know, I'm short X amount of fats a day, you know, blah, blah, blah. I mean, that's the value of having more protein throughout the day, or that's the value of having, you know, carbohydrates. I mean, typically protein and carbohydrates are the ones that need the most planning, and then fats are kind of easier. I mean, worst case scenario, you're short on fats, you know, just go have some peanut butter and go to bed, right? So I would keep that in mind.
Okay, I'd absolutely agree in regards to the preparation. And with Jill, you know, if you know you have blood sugar issues and you know you've had issues in the past before where you know you're not prepared and you feel like crap and you're really tired and you have to resort to drinking a Coke, you know, buy some bars, throw it in your desk drawer, you know, have some bananas, you know, just easy things where you're never stuck in that situation where you get to that state where you know, where you feel like crap. You know, you always have something on hand because you know it's a frequent occurrence and you know you're going to feel bad when this happens. So,
Well, my mother-in-law was a diabetic, and she used to have these issues all the time. But honestly, her issues were preparation. You know, I mean, I wasn't near as evolved in my nutrition journey. I barely paid attention to nutrition at that point. But knowing what I know now, I would have kept her prepared with food, you know. And she was okay at it, you know, after a while. And my wife was obviously, you know, very on it for her. But yeah, I mean, it comes to it, you know. I mean, at some point we all have to grow up, right? We have to make, you know, our health and energy a priority, and really blood sugar issues comes down to energy stability. So let's see. But I am really interested, Jill, to see what your Fitbit information looks like in the group. So make sure that you get that updated. So now they're saying, oh, okay, so eat the Fitbit calories during your control days without weightlifting. Yeah, I mean, what you're trying to ultimately figure out is, you know, what your daily energy expenditure is. And, you know, I mean, you don't need to be super obsessive about it, but certainly if, you know, what we're really trying to point out to people is that the secret is not, you know, down, down, down all the time. You know, the secret is somewhat up, and actually you should be up much more than you are down. And that's the real secret. If you show me anyone really successful at dieting, I'll show you someone that wasn't dieting for a long period of time. So Tracy's saying, I want to comment on listening to our bodies. On Saturday, I did this really challenging workout. I was so hungry that night. I ate 3 huge pieces of pizza. I was still hungry, so I ate more. I recovered the following day with a rest day. Then I jumped on the scale and I lost weight. Crazy, yes. I'm increasing my calories. I continue to make gains. I'm really starting to see amazing things happening. I'm about 8 weeks into this. And here's one more thing. People at our box are asking what I'm doing. I love that. Just wanted to share some really positive things. Yeah, I think that, you know, it's really not just about losing weight, but if you're coming from an underfed background and you have like high levels of cortisol and things of this nature, what, you know, we talk about this incessantly, you know, that some level of protein, some level of calories, but certainly carbohydrates are antagonists to that cortisol. And so that's one of the reasons why you sleep better. That's one of the reasons why you lean out when you're in a stressful situation and you end up, eating a little bit more. In this case, the stressful situation was caused by working out. And so she listened to her body and just ate more food. Once again, I explained the exact same scenario with me in the rowing example last week. If you go back and look at my Fitbit is public. I post it all the time. If you, don't know where it is, I can post it in the slot if you just ask me. But that day after rowing was a rest day, and I believe I ate 3,700 calories, even though my burn was only like 2,900 or something like that. And I ended up being weight stable from the previous day. So yeah, that corresponds with what Tracy's saying. And yeah, it is counterintuitive. You know what I mean? If you're new to all this, but the one thing about Eat to Perform that I think secretly everyone kind of knows is like, yeah, I kind of knew that. I kind of knew that I couldn't just eat less for the rest of my life and then end up having that ideal physique, that it was going to be some give and take, and it was going to take some work, and it was going to, maybe not understand everything and not get it perfect, but still, sticking with the plan. It's so easy to stick with a plan where expansion is involved, right? And people get bothered by the expansion word because they're like, well, I don't want to expand. And it's like, no, we're not talking about, you gaining weight, or we're not talking about, you can stay weight stable. I will say though, a little bit of the secret is allowing for that little bit of 2 to 3 pounds. I mean, people freak out about that 2 to 3 pounds. That 2 to 3 pounds is a little bit of the secret. The feeling a little bloated, a little bit of the secret, right? So keep that in mind as we go. I want to make sure that I didn't miss, I think I missed Melissa's question. She said, can we go back to the Fitbit topic for a second? My burn is always higher than my food intake, but I'm gaining weight, but all this is still new. Gains in the gym are happening, feel so much food. You're talking about this now. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, what I think happens in situations like yours is it feels counterintuitive. It doesn't feel comfortable adding in more food. Certainly, your body's going to adjust to having a small amount of food, and so adding in a certain amount of carbohydrates, especially if you're eating a lot of whole foods, a lot of fiber, things of that nature, kind of feels wrong for me to say to you that you should have more energy dense sources, especially since everyone demonizes those things. But that's how you get there. That's how you get your body an appropriate amount of food. I mean, one of the things that people focus on is the pre-workout and post-workout. And what I always like to have people know is that those things they're not super, super important as it relates to optimization, but they are probably pretty important as it relates to a strategy, right? And so, if you're struggling getting in a certain amount of food and you don't like to feel bloated, you're probably going to have the best result loading those foods around those times and not being mentally in your head. I mean, whether it's the Fitbit, whether it's the scale, we know that people don't always respond positively to data, right? And so what you want to be able to do is be able to use the data, but also keep your sanity in the process. So I hope that helps. But yeah, Melissa, I think that your thing is going to come down to a level of having more energy dense sources, but also being a little patient, maybe taking a little bit of a slower approach, especially if you're coming from an underfed background. So like I said, we're ending this at 8 o'clock on the nose. We are actually got through all the questions. I appreciate everybody being here, and I am going for a bike ride. Talk to you guys later. Bye, April.
Good night.
See you tomorrow morning.